Most people think you need to escape your environment to become successful. But what if I told you the richest minds in history were built in the poorest places on earth? That poverty isn't just about money, it's about mindset. And the moment you change that, everything around you begins to change. Stay with me, because by the end of this speech, you'll see how to build a rich mindset even when you're surrounded by scarcity, doubt, and limitation. You don't need a rich environment to start thinking rich. You don't need wealth to develop the mind that creates it. Most people wait for their surroundings to change before they decide to think differently. But the truth is, environments don't change until minds do. Every neighborhood, every small town, every broken place that produced greatness had one thing in common. Someone refused to let their surroundings define them. Someone decided that even if they were surrounded by lack, they wouldn't be controlled by it. And that decision is where transformation begins. You can be in the poorest place, but if your thoughts, habits, and perspective are focused on abundance, discipline, and purpose, you've already left poverty behind. The real poverty isn't the lack of money. It's the lack of vision. When you can't see beyond your circumstances, you stay trapped in them. But the moment you start to see differently, everything shifts. You begin to recognize opportunities where others see problems. You start asking better questions, seeing patterns, learning from people you've never met through books, mentors, and even your mistakes. You stop blaming where you are and start focusing on who you're becoming. The mind that is rich doesn't wait for the world to hand it anything. It creates value from nothing. It finds ways to grow even in barren soil. That's why some people rise out of the most difficult backgrounds, because their imagination was richer than their environment. The first step in building a rich mindset in a poor environment begins with an act of mental rebellion. It's the moment you decide that what surrounds you will not control what's inside you. When you grow up in an environment where lack is normal, where limitation is the culture, and where complaining is the soundtrack, your mind slowly absorbs that energy and begins to believe it. You start thinking in terms of survival instead of growth. You begin to expect less, settle faster, and stop reaching beyond what you see. But the instant you awaken to the truth that your environment is not your destiny, everything changes. That single decision to rebel against limitation, to think differently even when everyone else is thinking the same, is the beginning of wealth in its truest form. Because wealth starts in the mind long before it appears in your hands. Rebellion, in this sense, isn't about being against people. It's about being against patterns. It's about refusing to repeat cycles that produce nothing but scarcity and frustration. You can respect where you come from without staying trapped by it. You can love your roots and still grow in a new direction. A poor environment teaches you to accept that this is just how it is. But a rich mindset whispers, this is how it is now, but it doesn't have to stay this way. That mental whisper is powerful. It's the quiet moment when you stop agreeing with limitation. The day you stop agreeing with limitation is the day you start aligning with possibility. And that alignment is what separates the ones who break out from the ones who blend in. Building a rich mindset in a poor environment is not easy, because you're not just fighting against poverty of money. You're fighting against poverty of thought. You're surrounded by voices telling you to be realistic, to stop dreaming, to accept things as they are. You're told that ambition is arrogance, that success is only for the lucky or the connected. These voices are not your enemies. They're simply echoes of fear. They belong to people who gave up on their own potential and now feel threatened by yours. If you listen to them long enough, you'll start thinking like them. That's why mental rebellion requires courage. It requires the strength to think differently, to act differently, to dream differently, even when no one around you supports it. Rebellion begins quietly. It doesn't need to be loud or aggressive. It starts when you make small mental choices that go against the grain. When others waste time, you use it. When others gossip, you study. When others complain, you plan. When others see obstacles, you look for openings. Each of those decisions is an act of rebellion against the environment that raised you. Each one is a small declaration that says, I refuse to live by the limits I was taught. Over time, these small rebellions reshape your identity. You stop identifying yourself with poverty and start identifying yourself with progress. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of your environment and start seeing yourself as the creator of your own. A rich mindset doesn't ignore reality, it redefines it. It looks at the same challenges everyone else sees, but interprets them differently. Where others see impossibility, you see opportunity for innovation. Where others see rejection, you see redirection. Where others see the end, you see a lesson. The world doesn't change because your environment gets better. It changes because your perception gets sharper. That's what mental rebellion does. It gives you new eyes. Suddenly you realize that you've been surrounded by hidden possibilities all along, but you couldn't see them while you were trapped in a mindset of lack. Rebellion clears the fog. It opens your imagination to new ways of thinking, living, and becoming. When you live in a poor environment, mediocrity often becomes invisible because it's normal. You don't notice how low the standards are until you raise your own. The moment you start expecting more from yourself, the contrast becomes obvious. You see the wasted potential, the excuses, the comfort zones disguised as contentment. And that's when the internal battle begins. The environment wants to pull you back. It wants you to be like everyone else. The people who once liked you might start criticizing you, not because you've changed for the worse, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. That's why rebellion takes resilience. You have to be willing to walk alone for a while. You have to be okay with being misunderstood, even mocked. Because while others are busy maintaining their comfort, you're busy building your future. Mental rebellion is not a one-time event. It's a daily discipline. Every day, you wake up in the same surroundings that once shaped your limitations, and you have to remind yourself, I'm not that person anymore. You have to actively choose to think differently, act differently, and stay focused on what you want to build instead of what you want to escape. The poor environment wants to trap you with its stories. Stories about failure, about impossibility, about why success is only for others. But your job is to write new stories. You rewrite those stories through discipline, through mindset, through vision. Every time you push yourself to keep going, every time you do something productive instead of something easy, you're writing a new story for yourself. Mental rebellion also requires awareness. You have to be able to recognize when the environment is influencing you more than you're influencing it. When you catch yourself adopting negative language, self-doubt, or excuses that you've heard around you, that's your signal to wake up. You can't change what you don't notice. Awareness is how you take back control of your thoughts. When you realize that most of your limitations are inherited, not chosen, you gain power. You start to see that the beliefs that kept generations stuck can end with you. That realization alone is wealth. Because when you change your beliefs, you change your behaviors, and when you change your behaviors, your entire reality starts to shift. Rebellion isn't glamorous in the beginning. It feels uncomfortable. You'll often feel out of place because you're no longer fully part of the environment you came from. But you haven't yet arrived at the environment you're building. That in-between stage is where most people give up. They feel the pressure of loneliness and the discomfort of growth, and they return to what's familiar. But if you can endure that season, if you can stand in that gap long enough, you'll find your strength. You'll discover that true wealth has little to do with money and everything to do with identity. You'll realize that once you master your thoughts, the world loses its power to control you. The richest people in history often came from poor environments, not because they were lucky, but because they refused to think like their surroundings. They used their environment as contrast, not confinement. They used the hardship as motivation to grow stronger, sharper, and more resourceful. They didn't let the darkness dim their vision. They let it sharpen their focus. That's the essence of a rich mindset. It doesn't deny struggle, it transforms it. It doesn't run from pressure, it uses it as purpose. Every time you choose to think beyond your environment, you create a mental gap between where you are and where you're going. That gap is your growth zone. That's where transformation happens. The bigger your thoughts become, the smaller your environment starts to feel. It loses its hold on you because you're already living mentally in the future you're building. You might still walk the same streets, see the same faces, face the same limitations, but your internal world has shifted. You start seeing opportunity where others see dead ends. You start talking like someone who's already successful, walking like someone who's already confident, thinking like someone who already knows their time is coming. Rebellion turns into rhythm when you keep practicing it. At first, it feels like resistance. Later, it becomes normal. What used to be rebellion becomes your standard. That's when you know the shift is complete. You no longer have to fight against the environment because it no longer defines you. You've built a new environment inside your mind. One built on growth, gratitude, and vision. You've become proof that a rich mindset doesn't depend on rich surroundings. It's the rebellion of thought that opens the door to transformation. And that door can be opened by anyone who chooses to think differently, no matter where they begin. A poor environment is not a punishment. It's a classroom that teaches lessons wealth could never offer. When you live in scarcity, you learn things that people surrounded by abundance rarely understand. You learn how to create from nothing, how to survive on creativity, how to build strength out of necessity. Scarcity sharpens the mind like struggle sharpens the soul. It strips away the luxury of excuses and forces you to find a way forward when every door seems closed. That's where the rich mindset is born, not in comfort, but in challenge. It's easy to think big when everything is available, but thinking big when you have nothing, that's where real vision begins. When you have little, you're forced to become resourceful. You start asking different questions. Instead of saying, I don't have enough, you begin to ask, what can I do with what I have? That question alone transforms your thinking. It moves you from complaint to creativity, from limitation to invention. People with a rich mindset see the same lack others see, but they view it as training, not tragedy. They understand that scarcity doesn't just expose what you don't have. It reveals what you're capable of. It pushes you to think differently, to work smarter, to make something out of nothing. Every great story of success began with someone in a poor environment who chose to see scarcity as a teacher, not an enemy. When you have too much, you often stop thinking. Comfort dulls creativity. When things are easy, you don't innovate because you don't need to. But scarcity forces innovation. It pushes you to stretch your mind, to find angles, to see opportunity in ordinary things. It's the reason some of the most creative people in the world come from backgrounds where they had to hustle for every inch of progress. They learned to maximize small resources, to use time wisely, to see every challenge as a chance to grow. The poor environment becomes a boot camp for imagination, a place where every setback becomes a lesson in adaptation. It's the kind of training that money can't buy, the kind that builds character and clarity. Scarcity also trains you to value things differently. When you don't have much, you appreciate what you do have. You learn the worth of time, the power of effort, the value of relationships. You stop taking things for granted because you can't afford to. That awareness becomes a kind of wealth in itself. It builds discipline, gratitude, and resilience. People raised in abundance often lose those values because they've never had to fight for them. But when you've come from struggle, you know what every step costs. You know what every small victory means. That sense of value becomes the foundation of a rich mindset. The understanding that nothing is free, that everything worthwhile must be earned. That growth is a reward for consistency. A poor environment doesn't just test your creativity, it tests your patience. It teaches you how to wait without quitting. It teaches you how to move forward when results are invisible. You learn to plant seeds and trust the process. You learn that just because something isn't growing yet doesn't mean it's not working. The discipline you build during those silent seasons becomes the strength that carries you when opportunities finally arrive. Most people in comfort never develop that patience because they never have to. They expect instant gratification, and when things take too long, they give up. But those who've lived in scarcity know that growth takes time. They've learned to endure boredom, to keep showing up, to trust the long game. That endurance becomes one of the richest qualities a person can have. When you're surrounded by lack, you begin to realize that the most valuable asset you possess is your mindset. Money can be lost, opportunities can be delayed, but the ability to think clearly, adapt quickly, and stay focused through chaos is something no environment can take away from you. That realization makes you unstoppable. You begin to understand that wealth isn't something you chase, it's something you create through how you think. You might not have resources yet, but you have resourcefulness. You might not have connections yet, but you have consistency. You might not have comfort yet, but you have courage. Those internal resources are what turn a poor environment into a rich training ground. Scarcity also forces you to separate desire from distraction. When you have less, you can't afford to waste. You learn to invest your energy wisely. You learn to say no to things that don't serve your growth. In a poor environment, focus becomes survival. You can't chase everything, so you learn to prioritize what truly matters. That focus becomes your edge. It helps you filter noise, ignore negativity, and build momentum one small decision at a time. In a world full of people chasing quick wins, the person who learned to stay focused in scarcity becomes unbeatable when abundance arrives. There's also a hidden strength in having to start with nothing. When you've built something from the ground up, you develop a confidence that can't be shaken. You stop fearing loss because you've already learned how to rebuild. That's what scarcity does. It teaches you how to begin again. It makes you resilient. It removes the illusion of security and replaces it with real self-belief. You start to realize that you don't need perfect conditions to succeed. You just need persistence and perspective. You've seen what happens when you refuse to quit, and that memory becomes fuel for every future challenge. Scarcity sharpens not only your creativity, but also your empathy. When you've struggled, you understand others who struggle. You value kindness because you know what it feels like to be overlooked. You treat people better because you remember what it's like to be ignored. That humility keeps you grounded when success comes. It reminds you that wealth is not just what you accumulate, but what you contribute. The poor environment, for all its hardship, teaches you that people matter more than possessions, that gratitude matters more than glamour. Those lessons become your compass when you finally rise above. A rich mindset looks at scarcity and sees possibility. It sees lessons hidden inside hardship. It sees opportunities disguised as obstacles. It understands that having less can make you more efficient, more focused, and more determined. Scarcity becomes a teacher in discipline, in strategy, and endurance. It teaches you how to turn frustration into fuel, how to see challenges as invitations to grow. When others say, "I can't because I don't have enough," you say, "I will because I must." That difference in mindset is what separates those who wait for chances from those who create them. The environment that limits most people can liberate you if you approach it with the right perspective. You stop saying, "This place is holding me back," and start saying, "This place is preparing me." You start seeing every difficulty as a disguised advantage. The lack of opportunity forces you to invent opportunity. The lack of support forces you to become your own motivation. The lack of resources forces you to develop self-reliance. What feels like a burden now becomes the very thing that shapes your strength later. That's the paradox of scarcity. It feels like it's breaking you when in truth, it's building you. When you treat scarcity as training, you begin to notice subtle shifts in your thinking. You stop waiting for ideal conditions. You start working with what's in front of you. You begin to see how many excuses are built from comfort, not struggle. The poor environment teaches you to use time wisely because you can't afford to waste it. It teaches you to value education because you know what ignorance costs. It teaches you to stay disciplined because distractions come cheap, but success comes expensive. These lessons forge a mindset that thrives anywhere. Once you've learned to create in scarcity, abundance becomes simple. When you're forced to operate with limited tools, you learn to use your mind as your most powerful weapon. You stop depending on luck and start depending on learning. You stop waiting for help and start building skill. You realize that your brain is the ultimate asset, capable of producing ideas, strategies, and solutions that no amount of money could buy. That's the hidden wealth of scarcity. It forces you to think deeply, work deliberately, and evolve constantly. The person who learns to think richly while surrounded by poverty has already won, because they've discovered a truth most never will: that real wealth is not built from what you have, but from what you do with what you have. You can't always change the people around you, but you can change what you feed your mind with. A rich mindset begins with mental exposure, not physical relocation. You might not be able to move to a better neighborhood or surround yourself with wealthy mentors in person, but you can build a new world inside your mind by choosing what you listen to, what you read, and what you think about every single day. The truth is, your environment doesn't just consist of the walls around you. It's made up of the ideas that enter your mind. Every thought you entertain, every conversation you engage in, every piece of content you consume is part of your mental environment. If you can't find success around you, then you must import it through your attention. That's the secret to surrounding yourself with mental abundance while living in physical scarcity. A poor environment constantly feeds you limitation. It speaks in the language of can't, won't, and never. It tells you that success is for other people, that dreaming is unrealistic, that hard work doesn't pay off. If you listen to that language long enough, you begin to internalize it, and your actions start to align with it. That's why changing your mental diet is essential. You have to starve your mind of negativity and feed it with inspiration. You have to make the decision that your thoughts will no longer be a reflection of your surroundings, but a reflection of your aspirations. What you feed your mind eventually becomes your reality, and in a poor environment, that becomes your most powerful weapon, the ability to choose your influences consciously. When you start exposing yourself to ideas that elevate you, something subtle begins to shift. You start to think differently, speak differently, and even carry yourself differently. It doesn't happen overnight, but the change is undeniable. You begin to question beliefs you once accepted as truth. You start seeing patterns of failure and realizing they aren't inevitable. They're learned. When you listen to great thinkers, read powerful books, and study people who've walked the path you want to take, you begin to reprogram your mind. You stop absorbing the scarcity mindset that says there's not enough, and start adopting the abundance mindset that says, I can create more. The more you feed yourself these new ideas, the more your thinking expands beyond what you see in front of you. You can't always find positive people in your immediate circle, but you can find positive voices through books, podcasts, speeches, and online mentors. In this era, you don't need physical proximity to be surrounded by greatness. You just need digital access and the discipline to use it wisely. Every time you open a book, instead of scrolling aimlessly, you are shifting your mental environment. Every time you listen to something that teaches you, instead of something that distracts you, you're breaking the pattern of poverty thinking. You begin to understand that exposure creates expansion. The more you expose your mind to growth, the less power your surroundings have over you. A poor environment tries to make you blend in. It wants you to think, act, and live like everyone else. But when your mental environment is rich, you start standing out. You start seeing opportunities others ignore. You stop wasting energy on complaining because you've filled your mind with solutions. You become the person who brings ideas instead of excuses, focus instead of gossip, hope instead of fear. That's what happens when your internal world becomes stronger than your external one. You start influencing your environment instead of being influenced by it. People begin to notice the difference, even if they can't explain it. They see something in you that doesn't belong to the place you're from. That's the power of mental abundance. It makes you magnetic to growth. The voices you choose to listen to every day are shaping your future. Some voices drain you, others drive you. Some make you doubt yourself, others remind you of what's possible. A rich mindset is built by listening intentionally. You begin filtering what enters your mind the same way a wealthy person filters what enters their investments. You guard your attention like a treasure because you understand that attention builds identity. The more you feed your focus with purpose-driven ideas, the more immune you become to distraction. You stop wasting energy reacting to negativity because you've trained your mind to stay centered on creation. This discipline transforms you from someone who consumes information aimlessly into someone who curates knowledge purposefully. Over time, your mental environment becomes so strong that your physical environment loses its grip. You might still wake up in the same room, walk through the same streets, face the same problems, but your perspective has evolved. You start seeing possibilities that were invisible before. You realize that the reason most people stay stuck isn't because they lack opportunity, but because they lack exposure to new ways of thinking. Once your mind has tasted abundance, it can never be satisfied with mediocrity again. You'll start making decisions differently. You'll start talking about goals, strategies, and habits while others talk about problems, rumors, and blame. The people around you might not understand you anymore, and that's okay. Growth always creates distance. The challenge of living with a rich mindset in a poor environment is that you will often feel alone. You'll feel misunderstood. You'll feel like you don't belong anywhere. Too ambitious for your surroundings, but not yet successful enough to move beyond them. That's the stage where most people break down, but it's also the stage where transformation takes root. You have to keep feeding your mind. Even when no one else believes in what you're doing, you have to keep learning, even when you don't see immediate results. The mental environment you're building is your lifeline. It's what keeps your dream alive when everything around you tries to suffocate it. Building a rich mindset in a poor environment also means becoming intentional about your conversations. Words are powerful, and every conversation you engage in either builds or drains your mindset. When you talk with people who complain, you absorb their energy. When you talk with people who plan, you absorb their vision. Choose your conversations as carefully as you choose your goals. You might not be able to eliminate all negativity, but you can limit its influence. You can decide that your voice will always carry optimism, purpose, and belief, even when surrounded by doubt. That decision alone creates a mental shift that elevates your energy and attracts better opportunities. Your mind must become your sanctuary. a place no negativity can invade. When your environment is filled with chaos, your thoughts must be filled with clarity. When your surroundings are filled with scarcity, your imagination must overflow with abundance. That's how you build mental strength in difficult conditions. You stop letting the outside world control your inner peace. You take ownership of your thoughts the way a leader takes ownership of their mission. You start designing your mental world intentionally by choosing powerful ideas, by practicing gratitude daily, by visualizing your goals, and by focusing on what you can control instead of what you can't. One of the greatest transformations happens when you realize that the environment you grew up in doesn't have to be the one you stay mentally trapped in. You can create a completely different mental reality, one of focus, purpose, and vision, and live in it every day, even before your external life catches up. That's what people mean when they say, you must believe it before you see it. The belief is the seed, and exposure is the soil that helps it grow. Every book you read, every mentor you learn from, every hour you invest in personal growth is a seed of wealth planted in your mind. Over time, those seeds begin to bear fruit in the form of wisdom, confidence, and opportunity. A poor environment has no power over someone who has learned to think richly. When you fill your mind with abundance, your thoughts begin to shape your world. You might start small, reading a few pages a day, listening to one inspiring message, writing down your goals. But those small acts compound. You'll notice your attitude changing, your habits improving, your energy shifting. You'll start attracting better conversations, better ideas, better results. Because what you put in your mind doesn't just stay there, it radiates outward through your words, your actions, and your presence. You become a light in an environment that's used to darkness, and slowly, you begin to change not only your life, but the atmosphere around you. Becoming the person who endures difficulty, rejection, and isolation is not about pretending to be strong. It's about training yourself to be grounded when everything around you feels unstable. A rich mindset in a poor environment requires more than knowledge. It requires endurance. You can learn all the right principles, listen to every motivational speech, and write down your goals, but if you cannot persist through boredom, criticism, and disappointment, your potential will remain buried. Endurance is what transforms ideas into reality. It's the invisible strength that allows you to keep walking through the fog of uncertainty until the road becomes clear. Most people want to win, but few are willing to withstand the waiting, the repetition, and the loneliness that comes with becoming someone greater than their surroundings. The world around you will not always support your vision. When you start changing your mindset, the people around you might see it as arrogance. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. But they'll say it as if it's a bad thing. You'll start feeling like a stranger among your own people, and that's when endurance becomes necessary. You must learn to stay calm when misunderstood, to stay focused when distracted, and to stay faithful when progress feels invisible. The moment you outgrow your environment,